of wasn't. It certainly was a situation where they thought they had a particular set of skills that they would like to apply to their company's response and interaction with it. But the response they got was different than what they saw back in their home country. And we looked it through the lens of saying, obviously, this isn't a right or wrong situation. It was just a very good point in which the crisis was being seen and responded to, and how his, I guess, what he was trying to do is trying to offer his services in some way, shape, or form, coming from what he described as a culture that when you see adversity, when you see that you have a certain set of skills that you can apply to it, you do whatever you can to share that with people and make it happen. And then he's in another culture where that he said that would seem to be a little bit, not that it wasn't accepted or wasn't welcome, but there was just seemed to be a little bit more of a process that he had to go through. And his thinking was coming from his culture where, you know, crisis was kind of something historically that the people are used to. That process may have been put aside slightly in terms of that interaction back in his home country, but his new country, that wasn't the case. So
what were the two countries that were involved in this dynamic?
So he's coming from Costa Rica. He's Cuban born, but he's come to the US. So and he's here now. So, you know, obviously his company's response is great, and it's prescient, and it's responsive. But it was just that kind of that little interaction that he was asking me about that prompted this discussion, right? I mean, it prompted a discussion between him and I.
Yeah.
And obviously, when I shared that with you, it kind of brought up this, you know, there's something to this.
Yeah, there is. And I've had several conversations around the globe last week. Some neighbors of ours, we live, for those of you who are watching and don't know, I am located in Atlanta, Georgia, which is in the Eastern time zone in the United States. Brett is in Chicago in the Central time zone. We're both based in the United States, but none of us are born here. I was born in Germany. And Brett, where were you born?
Sydney, Australia.
Yeah, right, Mike. So I had a couple of conversations. So there's neighbors here that are originally from Italy. Arguably right now, the epicenter of the epidemic, or the country that is being hit most or affected most by Corona and COVID-19. And they were just recently still in Italy. The husband's from Tuscany, from the Florence area, or Siena, I'm not quite sure. And the wife is from the greater Milano area. So Lombardy, right? The area that has been hit really hard in Italy. And they were there with their kids, and they were about to travel back to Atlanta. And they took a train to Switzerland. And they were not checked. There was no screening. There was no fever measurement. There's nothing. So they rode the train to Switzerland. From Switzerland, they traveled on to Paris, France. Again, no check. And from Paris, they flew to Atlanta, Georgia. And as they arrived in Georgia, no check. So these are technically three breaches, right? One's from within the European Union into Switzerland, which isn't part of the EU. Then again, from Switzerland back into the EU, and then from the EU to the US. And mind you, this was, I think, a day or two before the US government restricted the travel from the European Union to the United States. But still, at that point, within Europe, the corona pandemic had already taken foot, and they were still able to travel fairly freely throughout the continent. So how would you argue is culture a piece of that, Brett?
Well, I think that when you've got you've got some cultures that have already gone through a lot of hardship, right? This is a continent, and you're born on that continent, as was my wife. And these are cultures that are used to crisis historically, right? And there is still a generation that remember this, and And I think there's been observations about aging populations in places like Italy where some of this influence still takes place. And while we're not here to kind of, we're certainly not virus specialists and things like that. But in terms of,
by no
yeah, by no means. But it is interesting just to see the response and how quickly a response is put into place. By cultures that come from that type of scenario where they see a country that is experiencing another country that's experiencing it with maybe a shorter experience with, I guess, that European influence. Maybe being, thinking that this is a huge crisis and it needs to be really shut down very quickly. Yeah. Or that the people themselves maybe have some kind of visceral reaction to authority coming in and telling them how to do it and what to do. Right. So there's a bunch of different kind of dynamics going on, and we see it all the time when we talk to our clients and their observations, even when times are not like this, right?
Right. Right.
From my culture, for example, I mean, I've approached this. I mean, I think in general, it's the culture that I come from, is that, this is, even though I've never really been through hard times, my country has never, there's been a whole generation that have never really seen recession, anything like that's taken place. But of course, I'm married to somebody who has grown up in hardship. So I've kind of got this balance of saying, well, you know what? I know people that have been through this kind of thing before. And the reason, and I would say to people, the people that are watching this stream, right? If you're nervous and you're upset and you're fearful, which are all natural reactions, the fact that you're able to actually sit and watch this means that you're 100% success rate in surviving whatever you've been through before, and whether it be personal hardship or more societal hardship. So, yes, while I'm not going to be completely Pollyannic and say that, but it really is a mental thing with my country that even on the surface is very much similar to the US, for example, a culture that's very, on the surface, they look very much the same. There has been a lot written about the influence of the difficulty of the colonies and how they were developed in Australia as opposed to the colonies and how they were developed in the US, through the sense that of Australians, for example, when the first fleet arrived, there was a lot of hardship. There was a difficulty in growing crops and raising animals, and so the colonies took a lot longer to establish themselves. So there was a tendency that they were a long way away from their overlords, let's call it, back in the early times of the colony, and they developed this real sense of group individuality, which is a kind of it seems like a I don't know, what do you call that? It's a conflict, right? A group individuality, meaning individually, yes, we have individual exceptionalism, but we really are more relying on the exceptionality of the group itself to resist any hardship and things like this. So,
right.
Yeah.
Well, what I noticed, though, there seem to be currently at least three prototypes of response evolving as the pandemic has evolved to the current stage. And this is we're nearing the end of March, and sure, the Americas are now receiving the pandemic with a bit of a delay compared to Europe and Asia, but now we could say we're in full swing, and it's a good time now to see what type of responses are we seeing. And at least from where I sit, I see that the Asian response is a little bit different than the European response and the US response, and especially in accordance with what you said earlier, Brett, about how much societies are accepting of the fact that they will have to restrict their movement. They have to accept that their civil liberties may be a bit compromised during these times. and how societies react if their leadership or if their governments and administrations are telling them what to do, right? And North America, the US, is notorious or prides itself in being defiant to any form of government that is perceived as overreaching, right? The United States as a country was formed in response to many, mainly European governments that were very restrictive and authoritarian and did not value individual liberties and civil rights. So the US was formed in response to that. And people said, well, this is how we want to govern ourselves. And we keep tight tabs on our governments. And by default, we don't really trust our governments very much. So we want to keep a constant control over that. Now, as you look at Asian cultures where they may or may not trust their governments either, that's not the point I'm trying to make. However, if you look at how China, how, the People's Republic or Taiwan or South Korea, Singapore, and Japan have responded to corona spreading and how they're really trying to prevent the spread from going further, or as they say, to flatten the curve, the response of the public seems to be much more accepting of the restrictions. I saw something on social media just over the weekend from somebody in Taiwan who said the government is tracking our cell phones. So via the GPS, they can monitor whether we are actually adhering to the curfew, the lockdowns. So they make sure that government knows where people are at any given moment. And this person wrote on social media, and at 7:45 my battery died. So the control was lost for a second, right? And by 8:15 the landline in the apartment rang, and 3 different government agencies were checking on that person. So that was half an hour later. 5 minutes after that, the police was at the person's door checking whether they were in. Now, by Taiwanese standards or by many other Asian cultures and society standards that may be perceived as very authoritarian and overreach of government, maybe, and it is most likely perceived as, okay, they're keeping us safe, they're checking on us, they're making sure that everybody sticks to the rules. Now try this approach in the US. What do you think would happen, Brett?
That's right. There would be of course, those kind of stories would be shared all over the place, and there'd be pandemonium, maybe. Right. But certainly a collective, visceral reaction to it, for sure.
Right.
Yeah. And then I think, I took a step back when I had this conversation with my client the other day, when I thought about this through how do we kind of look at leaders and leadership in general when it comes to these type of crises? I mean, this is a social crisis, it's a political crisis, but many companies and many organizations have crises that come up at any certain times in their growth. And of course, then we look at the leaders and we look to the actions of the leaders and what can we see how they react to these crises. And many times that can be cultural as well. Mm-hmm. So and we can now, of course, the biggest viewership of leadership now is through political leadership, of course. Although now companies are having to step up, CEOs are having to manage and make critical decisions about the future of their company, their shareholders, their employees, their customers. And so, I've been trying to take a step back from the political side of it, but look at it through the lens of a professional sense. So, and then of course, layering that in with, okay, where is this leader from? What has kind of influenced their response to it to navigate the choppy waters that their company or organization are going through at this point in time? And oftentimes it does line up very, very succinctly, generally with their general cultural style. And this would all, I think we can assume, not assume, of course, I hate saying that word, assumptions are bad, but it is usually a pattern that we see people that get to these leadership positions oftentimes have experience working with and navigating between different styles of people and dynamics, especially if they're a global company, right? We're a global world now, and they've had to develop these skills. And oftentimes our clients, right? We get to work with our clients that are in these high-level leadership positions, and oftentimes they don't realize the actual knowledge they've managed to kind of cling to themselves. and it's great to use certain assessment tools or insights into giving them the ability to recognize the skills they've got and build on top of those to make sure that they can navigate through crises like this. So we're seeing this come to the fore, right?
Right. Now, thanks, Brett. Now, let me take some time to acknowledge the people who are actually watching this live and commenting. I want to say hello back to some of the folks that are on here. Kathy Ellis here in Atlanta, Jane Jie Kim in Korea, Patricia Coleman over down in Florida, Vanessa Paisley in the UK, Yuko de Neville, our friend Yuko, originally from Japan via France, now also in Florida. By the way, she will be hosting a live session later today together with Patricia.
Yeah.
And we shall share the link again here. So don't go away after this. Program continues. Tammy Lewis joined. Ellen Hedblum from Michigan joined. Kate Annan said, quote unquote, help yourself cannot be translated into German language. There they ask for, quote, can you help me, unquote, or, quote, I will help you, unquote. Are they not able to help themselves and wait for the government? I'm not sure, Kate, if that is a question. There was no question mark. So if you care to specify or clarify your question, I'd love to, or we would love to address that. However, yes, there might be a linguistic difference. Holly Emmert from the Washington, D.C. area says hello. Alexandra Gawaszka. Oh, gosh, I don't speak Polish, Brett. But Alexandra from Poland is on.
Dzień dobry, jak się mamy?
Dzień dobry. I say that as well. Julie Parenteau from Puerto Rico, I believe, is on. Then we have Karen Kerno from the DC area. Oh, and here's Catherine. Okay, I want to give a shout out to Catherine because right after Brett and I decided to do this live session today, I went over to LinkedIn, which unfortunately is not yet granting us rights to live stream. For some reason, LinkedIn, if you're listening, make it happen. It can't be that hard. So over at LinkedIn, I saw a post by Catherine, and I hope I'm not butchering your name, but I believe it's pronounced Spehar. Looks Czech or Slovak, at least the way it's spelled. And she's actually based in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And she posted something on LinkedIn that she would like to, well, poll the experts or the people in the field how culture is affecting the response to Corona. And here we are. So I think we had the same thought at the same time, Catherine, and thanks for joining us here today. Stephanie Zuckerman joined. Louise Ekberg-Pond in Atlanta. Hello, Sweden in the house. And Karin Brunnemann, I believe. She's German. She says, it can also be based on individualism versus collectivism and the value of family. And there we are right into our cultural explorations, right? So for those of you who are new to this field, there are certain categories by which we in the field compare cultures. They're called cultural dimensions. And one of these, and dimensions are behavioral preferences that are usually expressed in polar opposites. So you have individualism versus collectivism, or a I, me, me culture versus a us, we culture, right? So those would be two poles that would be opposite. And I am in agreement with Karin. So if you're dealing with a highly individualistic culture, which The United States would be easily described as one of those. And compare that to a more collectivist group-oriented culture like Korea, like Japan, like China, then the response to crisis management is certainly affected by that. Yes. What else do we have here? Vanessa Paisley in the UK says family orientation is big, Italy, but Chinese are also family oriented, question mark. Okay, so I think, yeah, from my experience, yes, Chinese are very much family oriented. However, the family units tend to be a bit smaller than those in Mediterranean cultures. However, I think in extension to the family in Chinese culture, you have your social network that you're taking care of, the guangxi of people, the network of mutual obligations. Brett, any comments on that?
Well, I was discussing this with somebody that's moved to China or in the plans, even though stalled, moving to China. And we think about, I think, yes, in two cases where you've got a very family-orientated Italian mindset to have, but there's still the ability to share and be very, wear your heart on your sleeve and share that with your family within the network, right? In China, while yes, there's a very tight-knit community and internally in the family, you know, my time in China has seen there is a reticence to share bad news or at least be vulnerable to the emotion of negative information. We saw this wonderful movie called The Farewell, which just came out, where the grandmother who was diagnosed with cancer wasn't advised that she was supposed to be dying by the family. The whole family knew it except her. And strangely enough, she's lived on for 5 years after being diagnosed and told that the family were told that she was going to die within 3 months. But that resistance to share bad news and always be kind of very stoic, but maybe using the guanxi, as you talked about, to use that network to navigate these kind of crises is a little bit different. So just an anecdote, you know, that's just an observation of my experience anyway in China. Yeah.
We have a comment here from Korea on the situation in that part of the world. So Jane Kim from Korea says, do you think it is also from the culture basis? Because in Korea, once it happened, so once Corona happened, all people start to move for this. We easily have consensus and be one group to move forward. But individualism may be something still not that easy to make the same voice and impact to society. So Jane, if I understand you correctly, then you're confirming our analysis or our observations that in group-oriented and consensual cultures like Korea, once a direction is made from up top, which in this case would be the government, then everybody falls in line and does as they are told or does as is expected of them in order to serve the common good. Thank you for that comment, Jane. Very what I expected to hear from somebody in your part of the world. Thank you for that. Let's see, what other questions do we have here? Sue Shinomiya says hello from the West Coast. Birgitte Hohen Tolstrup from Denmark via Atlanta says hello. And who else do we have here? Catherine is happy that we pronounced her name right. And it's Slovenian. It's not Czech or Slovak, it's Slovenian. My apologies, but at least we pronounced it right. Excellent. Sue Shinomiya is asking, how is everyone holding up? Brett, how are you holding up?
I'm holding up well. I'm very, very fortunate, you know, very fortunate. I'm very grateful. I'm grateful that we get to continue doing this work. I mean, I get to continue doing this work. I know there's a lot of people struggling in the wider populace with some unknowns as far as work and jobs and that is concerned. Right now, what we're doing is doing exactly what we're doing here and trying to do what we can to spread the news. In fact, I think somebody just mentioned here is that one thing, so Holly says, one thing I know for sure is that those of us who assist others to bridge cultures have a real role to play in current events. So while, we're not, you and I are doing this as a, just because we're interested in it, it's our passion, it's our work, but it becomes even more important, just like Holly says, now we see an opportunity and we're having these conversations with our clients, especially if they're in the middle of transitions already. Added to this, that we can become a little bit of a sounding board and possibly, offer information, which in terms when people are fearful and there's a lot of uncertainty in the world, I'm somebody who likes to get information, and I don't mean scrolling through Facebook looking at all the
unless it's our session, right?
Unless it's our session, of course. But all the conspiracy theories. I mean, I think one thing is you have to be very disciplined as a leader now to filter out what's important and what is not important to listen to. I think that's one of the biggest things to take away from this. So for me personally, getting back to your question, long answer to a short question, is that for me it's information, because it's important for me that I have the very best information that I can pass on to the clients that are asking me these questions. They're nervous, they're unsure, on top of the uncertainty that comes with moving countries and engaging with people already. So I really agree with Holly there. I want to thank for that. Yeah.
And you just said the key word that I want to hop on. You said uncertainty, and we have a couple of comments here. Bob Mackey and also Karin Brunnemann, who weighed in. Question is by Bob: does anyone see Geert Hofstede's uncertainty avoidance dynamic as a factor in this? So for those of you who are not familiar with Geert Hofstede, he's kind of the grand poobah of cultural comparison. Dutch gentleman who recently passed away. He's one of the the initiators of this research. Let me simplify it that way. And one of the dimensions I mentioned, dimensions earlier. One of the dimensions that Geert Hofstede had defined was uncertainty avoidance, reflected in many other frameworks as well. And uncertainty avoidance is how much is a society, how much is a culture okay with having uncertainty, with not knowing all the moving parts. You could also paraphrase it: how much risk are we comfortable with? Are we a risk positive culture, or are we a risk cautious culture? And again, the US and many Anglo-Saxon cultures are often described and measured as very risk positive, risk forward cultures. You may be familiar with an American manufacturer of athletic wear and mainly shoes that are the brand name is stolen from Greek mythology, a Greek goddess. I'm not going to say the name of the company, but they have a slogan that captures this risk positivity, and it says, "Just do it." More risk conservative cultures will be wary of just jumping in and trying something new without having tested it out. So, Brett, does risk uncertainty avoidance, does that play into how we handle the pandemic, how we manage the crisis?
Yeah, yes. I'm just reading through the comments here. There's a couple of people that have commented on this very thing. So it is, and I just want to get back to somebody's comment that says there is, obviously we're being very careful here to not stereotype cultures through the land and saying the culture is the answer to everything. I think it was Alexander. I've scrolled past the comment, but I think it was Alexander that said we have to be careful about it, obviously. And we're trying to be careful as much as possible, because there are other dynamics that go on. I mean, when we talk about culture in terms of the levels of culture, this is very true in cultures like China at the moment, where older people act culturally in a different way to the younger people that have been more exposed to Western ideas. Mm-hmm. So these are just other dynamics that people a lot smarter than me have done a lot of research on, and that I learned from, that we just have to always be cognizant of the age group that we're talking about. So it's not unusual to see maybe younger people, like we've seen the videos of the people on the beaches. It's happening in my country as well, where people see it. It's their freedom and their right to go out and congregate, right?
Right.
And yet, so that's a high risk. We would see that as a high risk activity. I wouldn't particularly, as a parent, send my child out there, but maybe but that's just my particular set of circumstances.
Well, and Alan Hepblum posted a comment that apparently the governor of the U.S. state of Oklahoma, which is a fairly or rather conservative state in the geographic heart of the country, apparently the governor tweeted that he and his family would continue to go out to restaurants and eat whenever they wanted. So this is almost spiting the disease, so to say, right? So you're not telling, you're not, no matter how big the threat level, or no matter how well I perceive the threat level, I will not allow any ruling entity to restrict my motions or my movement. That there's a very strong sense of individualism that you can read through this. Of course, there's also politics involved that I don't want to touch on here, because that's a rabbit hole that will lead us down a dark path. But underlying of this behavior, the driver behind this reticence to agreeing to a group solution is a cultural predisposition to value individual rights over group responsibility, isn't it?
Yeah. Absolutely. Then,
yeah, go ahead.
Sue just said, people are hiking in Oregon and going to the beach, right? So it's just, there are certain people that are just, and now, unfortunately, there are also people in this society that are critical to our, managing through this crisis, and that's healthcare workers. They have no choice, and they are really in a profession that, by its very nature, at all costs, do no harm, right? The Hippocratic Oath, right? They are tasked, and through the sensibility of that function, to just basically buckle up, and this is what I signed up for, right? I signed up for care for my fellow human beings. I think we could probably, we could learn a lot from them by also being very cognizant of the fact that us, when we're not tasked to do that, take the responsibility to do what we need to do. But of course, that looks different in how it's communicated. Someone mentioned before, like they're getting tests. I think it was Slovenia, was it Alexander again, or maybe talking about getting texts from the government. Again, information. I didn't see the speech, but you mentioned Angela Merkel's speech, and
yes,
I'd be interested in you telling us a little bit more about what that looked like, because I've seen some other comments about it and how it actually, how she kind of portrayed it.
Well, there's just like in most democratic societies, or more Republican societies with elected governments, there has been some domestic infighting on who is taking control of the situation and who is handling it best, and people are jockeying for the best position or best perception of performance. Angela Merkel, the head of the German government, is not necessarily a lame duck, but she's the outgoing chancellor of the German government, and within the German political system, people are looking to see who's going to replace her, and in comes Corona, and now that plays a role in how the crisis is managed. Now, what I want to say is, though, during her entire tenure, Mrs. Merkel only gave not live, but like TV addresses to the German public once a year in her New Year's address. That was the one thing when she would go sit at her desk with a German flag behind it and speak and address the German people. And for the first time during her career, she did this again because of the pandemic. So that just shows the severity of the situation as it is perceived by the German government. So she found it necessary to address her people. The responses were mixed at first. So that speech she gave, I think, was last week on Tuesday or Wednesday. And some people said it was lukewarm. She wasn't casting a vision. She didn't rally the people behind an emotional core or something. And that's completely not her nature. If you've ever seen Angela Merkel talk, she's super matter-of-factly. She's a physicist, and she's the daughter of a Protestant pastor in what used to be East Germany. So she is by no means an emotional leader. She's a very matter-of-fact type of leader, and listening to facts and not to stories. She's somebody that is not swayed by emotional expressiveness or by gut feeling, as are several other world leaders right now. So there is this joke that when the only person that Vladimir Putin is afraid of is when Angie calls him, because they both speak German and Russian. But jokes aside, she gave a press conference on Sunday after the leaders of the federal states in Germany and the federal government came together to discuss what type of measures should be now imposed, given the current data and the current situation. And by her standards, I think she gave a very emotionally intelligent speech. She thanked the people in healthcare and everybody in uniform who are working their butts off to protect their fellow country people. And she said, unlike many people would expect of German leadership, she was not giving a clear direction, say, if you do this, then that, and you must do. And it wasn't with all this upgrading and enforcing lingo that you would find in concise, traditional German leadership. She had a very feminine, soft leadership in this, nevertheless still authoritarian. It was a very interesting mix because she said, I want to thank all of you who are already taking these measures and who are sticking to these rules that we set up, as hard as they may be for some of you right now. But I want to thank you for acknowledging that we are in a very special situation and you are acting accordingly in the interest of your families, your friends, your communities. And she said, and to those of you who might still be struggling with some of these new rules, let me invite you to see the light. She didn't say like that verbatim, but it was not, and to those of you who are not following the rules, I will tell you the hammer of the law will come down. No, she said, I will invite you to look at this with a more intelligent and open eye, right? And please be aware that we will enforce it. So it was a more veiled threat and not a in your face. So not what traditional the older generations in Germany would expect to see as a concise and what's the word, assertive type of leadership. No, this was more of a female, soft, emotionally intelligent approach, which is new to a lot of people in Germany, and you see a shift in that as well. So I think that's what you were referring to, right, Brett?
Absolutely, yeah. And then I was forwarded a speech by Justin Trudeau yesterday by a client who.
I yet have to watch that. I've seen that posted somewhere. I have to watch that.
Absolutely, yeah. And this client is actually moving to Canada, and we've had some short conversations, and I was talked about Canada and how different it is to the US, especially the area that they're going to, and the client sent it to me and said, I watched this speech and I saw a lot of things that you were telling me about in terms of the Canadian. And then I watched the speech. It was, to me, I think it was very good. But also the comments, especially on places like Twitter and other social media platforms. Justin Trudeau gets a lot of heat, as do a lot of political leaders in this day and age. But there are a lot of people that don't agree with his politics, that do not, that viscerally disagree with a lot of stuff that he does, that actually said, you know what, you don't have to like the guy, but here is a leader, right? Here is a leader in that kind of sense, that he's managing a very diverse, a large country with a diverse population, where he's had to really get this message down. And that message came through. It was short, concise. It was emotional, but not emotionally disconnected. And it was very good. So you see this sense of leadership, and you can see these when I finally watched it. I thought, yeah, okay, that makes sense, right? Now that doesn't mean that that's the right way or the wrong way. It just is, from my country's point of view, we have a kind of where there's tendency at the moment. There's a lot of mixed messages coming out from the leadership back in Australia, for example, other countries. That seems to work for those cultures, right? It seems to work for those people. But in that case, it just seemed to be that one prescient moment where he had to stand up and say, "We're going to look after people," right? This is what we do in this culture.
and I want to, even though I live in the United States, and there's a reason why I live in the United States that I don't need to go into here right now, but I do want to acknowledge what transpired over the weekend in Central Europe, where the idea of a united Europe has been under threat for many years, right? So we had the euro currency crisis several years ago, and we've seen authoritarian populist governments within Europe pulling at the fabric of this construct of a united, peaceful continent. Yet in times of crisis, these European cultures that are often so divergent and so different from each other, there's some sliver of hope, I think. So if you look at the numbers of infection compared to the death rates, Germany has a very high number of corona infected people. However, a significantly, almost unbelievable low number of COVID-19 related deaths. So the mortality rate in Germany is like I don't know the number, but it's super low. Look at the stats; you'll find them online. They're much lower than in any other country right now. And Italy has a high mortality rate. Spain and France do too. So there's two German states in the southwest, the Saarland and Baden-Württemberg, which share a border with France, and some in these regions in France, the Alsace and Lorraine. So it's Bas-Rhin and it's Grand Est. They're affected really hard, and their ICU units are over capacity. And the German regional government said, of course, we'll take your ICU patients. If you can take care of them, we will. That's the Europe we're talking about.
Yeah.
Makes me emotional just thinking about that.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's an emotional time, right? And Sue Shinomiya just took a stab at of her observation of my culture, right? And we have these conversations. I have these conversations online, with private groups and that kind of thing. But she mentioned the humor. There are some cultures that really, and I think maybe this is underutilized as far as leadership is concerned. And whereas in my culture, I think there's a great deal of dark humor. There's a great deal of poking fun at ourselves and that kind of stuff. And that's the way we deal with it, right? We deal with it. We've been very pragmatic. And it works for us. We're sarcastic. My client this morning was Danish. Strangely enough, the Danish, very, very sarcastic. And he's found that his interactions with, say, a lot of other cultures, he says, why does this fall flat?
Yeah.
I'm not being rude. I'm not being, I'm not diminishing the importance of what we do, but there is a point where we have to kind of just, we just have to step back and go, you know what, there are certain things in our control, right? And then there are certain things that are not. And then the things that we don't have in our control, we can poke fun at them and at ourselves. And we can see the spirit, right? That emotional response, that spirit we see in people needs to kind of, I guess, in leadership, maybe there's certain cultures that connect more. There's more of a relationship between the leadership and the populace. And where there is a separation, where there is a hierarchy or a separation from the populace, maybe the leadership doesn't seem to be connected to that, and can sometimes be seen as falling down. So there's another kind of pattern of leadership in terms of seeing it in different ways people are responding in cultures.
Thank you for that. I want to acknowledge something. There are a ton of comments and questions in the chat box, and even if we won't be able to address all of them here during the live session because we're still handling our conversation, and we're men, we're not good at multitasking. I will make it a point, and I think Brett will do the same. We will respond to your comments or questions in the chat box after the fact. I really applaud you and commend you for being on here. This is how we wanted it to be. I didn't necessarily expect it to be this much engaging, so I'm really tickled about your contributions, everyone around the world who's joining here. I'm really, really grateful for this, and we'll continue doing more of these sessions. So this is heartwarming. Love it. Brett, would you be okay if I shared our prepared cultural dimension comparison?
Let's do it.
All right, then.
For those that haven't seen seen it before, hopefully it'll be informative.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's see if this works the way I expected it to, because this is all new to me. And it's hitting Facebook with a delay, I'm suspecting, but let's see how this works. So you should see in a second.
Yep, it's up there now. Yeah.
It's up there now. Excellent. Now you see GlobeSmart, which is one of, and I'll scroll down so you can actually see it properly. So what you're looking at here is a cultural comparison instrument. It is called GlobeSmart Profile. Both Brett and I use it extensively in our work. For those of you who may not be in this field, in this industry, Brett, why don't you give our audience a quick explanation of how we use GlobeSmart?
Sure. As Christian said, this is a tool, one of the many tools that are accessible to people that do this work, and we use this quite a lot. And this is basically an assessment tool, and GlobeSmart has just been very thoroughly revamped, and it's an assessment tool that people can identify their own preferred working styles. And you can see it's a continuum. There's no right or wrong to this, and it just measures the overarching measurement profiles are displayed here. And so this is just a start of a conversation. And many times it's a way to kind of get an insight into what their particular style is and how it might contrast to the other individuals and other cultures that they're going to be working with. And then, of course, there's a whole deeper dimension and behind the mechanics of it that actually gives some really great tips and strategies on how to do that, whether you're a leader, whether you're somebody who's working in a sense. So it's it has 96 different countries in the inventory. So we're trying to cover as many as we possibly it covers as many as it possibly can. Yeah.
Now, for those of you who are looking at this for the first time or haven't seen any cultural comparison instrument used before, I want to get one thing out of the way. When we compare national cultures, the values or the dot on the grid you see for each individual country that's represented on this graphic, they're only a median value of that national culture. No country is homogeneous in its behavior. No culture is uniform, especially for bigger countries or larger population countries that you see here, the US, Germany, China, very diverse within their national borders. Korea, maybe not as much as, let's say, China or the US, but even in Italy and Spain, you'll find different regions with different behavioral preferences. So take this with a pinch of salt. This is a median value for those nations represented by the flag on the top. The 5 dimensions that GlobeSmart is comparing here, you see them, you look at them in a horizontal way, you see independence contrasted with interdependence. So independent meaning it's a individualistic culture. As I said earlier, the US and also to a certain degree Germany would fall into the more individualistic side. And interdependent meaning more group oriented, where you'll see many Asian cultures fall into that corner, and you also see the Mediterranean cultures of Italy and Spain more on the group side of that diagram. The second dimension is egalitarianism compared with status. You could also say status is very hierarchical, and egalitarianism is, well, no hierarchies or as little as possible the hierarchies. The third dimension is how much risk is a society comfortable with. We talked about this earlier, risk versus certainty. And then the second from the bottom, communication style. Do we communicate in a very direct manner or indirectly, more high context, reading between the lines and not expressing every thought with a word or a sentence? And finally, what's more important for us as we work together as a society to complete the task, to do the job? Or is it important that we have a relationship with those that help us complete that task before we can work together successfully? So you see a difference there as well. So we're not going to debrief the 6 nation cultures. We just wanted to give you a bit of a glimpse into this tool, and we understand we're running close to the end of the session, so we're about 2 minutes till the full hour. We wanted to make sure, though, that you get to take a look at this and you see that what we discussed in the past hour, a lot of it relates to these cultural dimensions and these comparisons, how certain countries organize their society and how they organize their being with each other, and how that may very well affect how they manage a crisis situations like the one we're seeing right now.
Absolutely.
Brett, over to you, Brett.
Yeah, I mean, one example, if I can just bring one kind of deeper aspect of this, is this the sense of situational and universalistic cultures. So situationally, cultures that really see the crisis come on, right, and they know in that particular case it's serious, and there has to be a real sense of urgency and formality and process to that particular situation. Now, it might happen in other cultures, even in the best of times, where at the office everybody is buttoned down, and then of course they go out to they treat each other in a very formal and direct way in that case. But then when they go out and they have fun, they let their hair down and they sing karaoke and all that kind of stuff. And on the other side, universalistic cultures where, you know, even in the crisis times, they try and apply their same style to the times when it's good. And that has, you know, varying degrees of success on both sides of that coin. So that can be brought into the level of risk and certainty, and how that situation, if you pull somebody out of a situation that's foreign to them, and that style is foreign to them, that makes people like that nervous, right? if you saw my profile is right, as far as risk is concerned, is right off the now that would makes me difficult or a little bit of an acquired taste to somebody who likes data and likes certainty and that kind of thing. So it's a great tool. It is a good starting point. Everybody, actually on the globesmart.com website, you can actually do your own profile for free. So you can kind of get an insight. You can get the starting point and just get it for free and just say, oh, yeah, well, I'm wondering how I score on this. And you might be surprised, is that a lot of our clients do get surprised at their results and say, I'm wondering why I scored on this because I think of this, right? And it's an interesting insight into a bit of self-reflection. Yeah.
Right.
Yep. Great.
Thanks for this, Brett. We're at the hour, and we could go on forever, but I do want to be cognizant of everybody's time. I really honor you all for being on here. We had a constant viewership for the entire hour. I really applaud you for sticking with us and weighing in. I am posting right now in the chat box on Facebook. As you're watching this, you should see an Eventbrite link that I just posted on behalf of the Culture Mastery. This is the Eventbrite link to the session that Yuko de Neuville and Patricia Coleman will start in 30 minutes. So if you want to continue on your learning path today, on your what I would call social engagement as compared to social distancing, which is a term that I will eradicate from my vocabulary, no matter what the governments and officials are telling us. We're not practicing social distancing, we're practicing spatial distancing, but we're still being social with each other, right? And this is what's been happening here for the past hour. And I want you to continue this. Go to that Eventbrite link and join Yuko and Patricia as they will talk about how work from home is not a vacation. So I'll be hopping on that as well. Brett, let me stop sharing this window here and let's go back to the two of us. Brett, thank you for taking time. This was, I think, a very successful session. Looking at the multitude of comments we had and the high engagement, I think we'll do this again, won't we?
Absolutely. It's been a lot of fun. Thank you, everybody. I mean, this is great. This is very touching, right? This is what we do, and the people that have been on here have been very generous, and we're very grateful for this. The best we can do is keep doing it. We're not perfect. We're just, as Christian said, we're a couple of blokes, right? At certain other hours, maybe we could have cocktails, but we'll talk about that later. That's a different thing.
Now I had coffee.
Yes.
So when we set this up, I said to Brett, it's ready, fire, aim. So yes. I might be German, but I've become Americanized in the sense that, let's just do this. So we did. I hope you got something out of it. And see you next time. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Okay. Stream has ended. All right.
Somebody asked me, somebody said, we're going to share, are we going to be sharing the link? I'm sure we could, I'm sure you can save the video on Facebook Live.